The first blast hit Havana harbor with no warning. A deep metallic groan rolled across the water, followed by a violent crack that split the air like a lightning strike at ground level. Dock workers froze as a white fireball surged upward from the French freighter tied to the pier. The SS La Coubre, loaded with crates of Belgian munitions, lurched violently as the explosion ripped open its forward hold. Shrapnel sliced through the air. A shockwave slammed into nearby warehouses, shaking windows and sending people running for cover. Smoke poured upward in thick black columns, and within seconds, the harbor filled with sirens, shouting, and the frantic scramble of men trying to understand what had just torn their city open. A second explosion detonated just minutes later, even larger than the first. That blast threw rescuers off their feet, crushed vehicles, and hurled bodies into the water. The heat singed clothing and skin, and burning fragments rained down across the docks. When the smoke began to settle, hundreds were dead or dying, and the remains of the La Coubre sagged at an angle, still smoldering, its steel warped and torn like paper. Earlier that morning, nothing had seemed unusual. The ship had arrived from Antwerp, carrying crates of small arms and ammunition bound for Cuba's newly armed revolutionary forces. Dock workers had seen weapons shipments before. The men assigned to unload the cargo were cautious but calm, moving crates with care, checking manifests, and following established safety rules. No one on the pier expected anything more dangerous than the usual risk of handling explosives in a busy port. The crew of the La Coubre went about their work quietly. They had made the voyage across the Atlantic without incident. The captain, Paul Vuillemin, kept a close eye on the cargo, aware of its sensitivity but confident in the loading procedures. Belgian inspectors had sealed the crates before departure, verifying their condition. Everything appeared routine when the harbor pilot guided the freighter to the dock. The sun was bright, and the wind was calm. There were no warnings, no signals, no suspicious activity around the vessel. The first explosion struck just as workers opened the forward hatch. Several witnesses later described seeing a flash inside the hold before the blast erupted outward. Men closest to the hatch disappeared instantly, swallowed by fire and debris. Others staggered away, burned and bleeding, shouting for help. The force of the blast was so strong it shattered windows in buildings several blocks away and sent a column of flame nearly 100 feet into the air. Cuban firefighters, soldiers, and dock workers sprinted toward the damaged ship. Some climbed aboard without hesitation, searching for survivors in the mangled metal. Ambulances and trucks rushed to the scene. Civilians ran in with stretchers, blankets, and makeshift bandages. The scene became a chaotic mix of heroism and terror. The cries of the injured echoed between the warehouse walls. Flames crackled inside the ruptured hold. Smoke stung eyes and burned throats. And still, the rescuers pushed forward. No one knew the second explosion was coming. It detonated with catastrophic force, destroying what was left of the forward section and sending bodies, tools, and pieces of the ship flying. Rescue teams were thrown backward. Some were crushed under falling debris. A steel plate tore loose and sailed across the dock like a spinning blade, striking several people before clattering to the ground. The second blast killed many of the very men who had run in to save others. When it was over, Havana harbor looked like a war zone. Firefighters worked through the smoke, spraying the ship with hoses. Medics knelt beside the wounded, trying to stop bleeding, trying to keep people conscious until they could be moved. Families rushed to the docks, searching for relatives. Soldiers formed cordons to control the crowds. The air was thick with soot and the smell of burning chemicals. Fidel Castro arrived at the scene within hours. He walked among the wreckage, stepping over twisted metal and broken crates. He spoke to survivors, listened to the wounded, and demanded answers. By nightfall, hundreds were confirmed dead, including French crewmen, Cuban workers, and soldiers. Dozens more were missing. Hospitals overflowed with burn victims and blast injuries. The government declared a national day of mourning, but mourning quickly collided with suspicion. Castro announced publicly that the explosion could not have been an accident. He accused foreign intelligence services of sabotage, suggesting that enemies of the Cuban Revolution had rigged the cargo to detonate once it reached Havana. He pointed at the United States as the most likely culprit, claiming the goal had been to weaken Cuba's defenses and destabilize the new government. His accusations spread rapidly through the population, fueled by anger and grief. Washington denied everything. They insisted the U.S. had no involvement and argued that the explosion must have been caused by improper handling or unstable munitions. Belgian officials, caught in the middle, launched their own investigation. They found no evidence the crates had been tampered with in Antwerp. The munitions had passed inspection. Nothing suggested sabotage before the ship left Europe. But after the blast, so much of the cargo had been destroyed that proving anything with certainty became nearly impossible. Cuban investigators examined the wreckage at length, but the damage was so extreme that clear answers were difficult to find. Some experts believed the first explosion might have triggered the second by destabilizing nearby crates. Others suggested that heat, friction, or a dropped load could have sparked the initial blast. Still others insisted that the timing and the violence of the second detonation felt deliberate. No single explanation ever satisfied everyone. In the decades that followed, the explosion of the SS La Coubre remained one of Havana's deepest scars. The harbor was rebuilt. The politics shifted, but the memory of that day stayed sharp in the minds of those who lived through it. Families who lost fathers, brothers, and sons kept their stories alive. Survivors carried burns and injuries long after the smoke cleared. Cold War tensions only amplified the mystery. Each side used the tragedy to support its own narrative. Cuba held annual commemorations, accusing foreign enemies of an attack. The United States maintained that it had nothing to do with the explosion. Historians examined reports, testimony, and technical data, but the truth stayed just out of reach, buried beneath political agendas and the physical destruction of the evidence. What remains certain is that the La Coubre exploded violently enough to kill hundreds in seconds, and its crew and the dock workers never saw it coming. The ship that had crossed the Atlantic without incident became a mass grave in Havana harbor, a symbol of fear and suspicion at a time when the world was choosing sides. The questions that started that day never fully found answers, and the truth of what happened inside the forward hold of the SS La Coubre remains one of the Cold War's most enduring shadows. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.